and leading Africanist, Professor Ali Mazrui, also points out, before European colonization, there were indigenous African justice systems in which the protection of the innocent was the main focus rather than the punishment of the guilty. Victim focus rather than violent focus. There was a decisive shift from focus on the victim of a crime to focus on the suspect or culprit. Africa's indigenous justice systems also shifted from emphasis on shame to emphasis on guilt. Shame is a subjective state of mind, which implies a state of unease and internal anxiety about something which has gone wrong. Guilt, especially in Western towns, is an objective condition which can be ascertained by the law of evidence and which can be measured in terms of degree. The colonial justice system substituted prison sentence to compensation. It also substituted guilt ascertainment to shame arousal. Third, it substituted strict personal responsibility by the culprit for collective family and social responsibility. For violations committed by a member of the group, the substitution of a cage for the villain in place of compensation for the victim, the insistence on objective guilt instead of subjective shame, the focus on personal individual accountability for collective responsibility, have all resulted not only in escalating crime and violence in our cities and urban areas, but also in the relentless decay of our present legal systems and structures of law enforcement institutions. How do we revolve these pluralistic, conflicting, and competing legal systems, concepts, principles, and reasoning into a holistic, harmonious whole, capable of absorbing the shocks due to the African colonial experience and of meeting the ever-present challenges of rapidly changing social needs? An integrated planned justice system does not aim at the preservation of criminal responsibility, ingredient of offenses and defenses. Rather, it ensures the universality of its principles. The concept of criminality among a people envisages a general revulsion of the proscribed conduct as unreprehensible to the society mores and therefore deserving general condemnation. Consequently, where the declared objectives of a justice system is the disregard of eminent attitudes and accepted norms, the resulting formulation of theories of responsibility, ingredient of offenses and defenses, cannot all be based on values outside the cultural belief. This is practically the effect of the inherited laws in many, if not all, our African countries. We are now faced with the unavoidable task of reordering our society through proper planning and execution of criminal justice policies to reflect societal values. The ideals of reasonableness, legitimacy of conduct, and sense of moral culpability can only be examined within the context of the cultural milieu of the society. It is therefore naive to assume that an alien morality can satisfy the sense of justice of a people, especially where these values are in essential and fundamental respect opposed to theirs. Hence, in the formulation of criminal justice policy, nothing but the cherished values of the people should form the substratum. If a contrary attitude is adopted, there is no doubt that the perennial problems of cultural pluralism, which is the bane of the criminal justice system in many of our developing countries, will continue to cry out for appropriate and deserving action. The legendary African scholar and jurist, Professor Theo Elias, in one of his many groundbreaking masterpieces entitled The Nature of African Customary Law, which is a required textbook for the University of London LLM course in African law, observed, and I quote, "Whereas African law strives consciously to reconcile the disputants in a lawsuit, Western law often tends to limit itself to the bare resolution of the conflict by stopping at the mere apportionment of blame as between the disputants. Judgment by agreement intended to restore and preserve the social balance, and not judgment by decree intended to enforce the legal rights of one party to the exclusion of the other. The object of litigation in African legal reasoning, therefore, is not punishment, but settlement of disputes. Not a declaration of strict rights, but reconciliation. The tender of amends by the wrongdoer implied an apology for the wrongdone. Its acceptance meant forgiveness and forgetting. This method would tend to adjust disturbances of the social equilibrium, to restore peace and goodwill, and to bind or rebind the two disputing groups together in a give and take reciprocity. Unlike the Western method, which tends to widen the gulf between the two groups by granting all the rights to one to the exclusion of the other, because it would, in general, concern itself only with legal principles and no cognizance of social implications. In the vast majority of cases, the general atmosphere of the African judicial process is not one of enforced power or solemn resentment, but one of peaceful debate of the issues dividing litigants in the sole belief that some kind of acceptance, some kind of acceptable solution will be found out of the elders' fund of wisdom and sense of justice. Generally, it seeks to state and enunciate the norms of social behavior expected of right-minded members of the community, to condemn departures from these objective standards, and to praise such acts as tend to maintain and enhance the general well-being of the community, to make peace, to effect a reconciliation if necessary by making one to pay a fine or compensation to the other, but always by the gentle process of argument and persuasion, leading gradually and inevitably to a verdict that is at once accepted by all. And running through it all is the transparent duty to reconcile disputants with each other, to reincorporate the minor criminal in society at large, and to show the necessity for elimination of the malefactor and the antisocial in the earnest endeavor to do justice, fair play, and equity. It is this motive to do equity that is the most characteristic of the African judicial process and reasoning. Aristotle, the master who knows, could have been thinking of African legal reasoning when he said, in the rhetoric, it is equity to pardon human failings, to look to the lawgiver and not to the law, to wish to settle a matter by words rather than by deeds. Lastly, to prefer arbitration to judgment. For the arbitrator sees what is equitable, but the judge only the law. And for this, an arbitrator was first appointed in order that equity may flourish. It remains to conclude that in this sense, the African judge, in his reasoning, is and must remain an arbitrator. It is on this indigenous African sense of dispute settlement, arbitration, conciliation, and reconciliation that a Nigerian student wrote a PhD thesis in an American university. And the Americans popularized it and claimed ownership of it and call it alternative dispute resolution. It is not alternative, it is African. Almost by definition, the Africa region is a region of new nations, which must tackle and accomplish several urgent needs all at once. The compelling goal is modernization, which is many pathways, some obvious, others baffling and obscure. The more obvious ones are education, health, economic development, improvement of communication, and so on. These have received and are receiving much scientific and institutional provisions. Less obvious, more baffling, and even more challenging are those pathways leading to the establishment of that stable legal and political order within which the desired and needed modernization to cope with the minimum standards and norms of the African Union can be made. This is the province of law. And in this province, it is urgent that a radical transformation should occur, both in the provision for research and in the consequent output of systematic and constructive thinking. For far more than the developed and established nations, the African states require the services of the most skilled, perceptive, and sophisticated machinery of law reform and law development that can be contrived. For we in Africa have less time in which to achieve comparable viability